Hey everybody, it's Monster Zero, and I am here today with something a little bit different. I've reached a point in the headphone hobby where I feel that I'm pretty close to being done. Not with the hobby, just with the continual cycle of buying new headphones and new amps and new DACs and rinse, repeat over and over. I think I'm pretty set with all the main stuff. And I've always known or been told that don't worry about cables and interconnects until everything else is in place. So as I said, for me, everything pretty much is in place. So I've started exploring various cables and whether there's any difference between a $5 cable and a $35 cable, or a $135 or a $1,000 cable. Is there a difference? That's what we're going to talk about today. So before me, I have 7 different RCA cables. I have 4 different USB cables, and I have some power cables here too. So this is going to be a long discussion. And the purpose of this video is not to convince you that cables make a difference. I'm not interested in that debate. I've been around long enough to know that there's two sides. One side believes cables make a difference. The other side thinks that the first side are a bunch of idiots and all cables sound the same. So if you belong to that second group, I'm not here to convince you otherwise. So because of that, I'm actually not going to allow comments on this video. It's the only video that I've done where I'm not going to allow comments because frankly, I don't give a damn. If you don't believe me, what I'm going to tell you here, and you think that all cables sound the same, hats off, enjoy your system, and you can ignore the rest of this video. But if you are in the first group who does believe that cables can make a difference, I've put this video together for you. This is a small sample out there. There's like I said, there's only 7 RCA cables here, a few USBs. Obviously, I cannot A/B every single cable in the world. I'd probably die before I could finish that experiment. So this is just a small sample. And I'm going to tell you what I heard, what I liked, what I didn't like, what was good, what was bad, what was fantastic. So kick back, relax, and let's get into this right away. So for contextual purposes, the gear that I used to evaluate these cables was my old Render N100H server into my Lampezator Atlantic TRP DAC, into my Glen OTL amp, into my ZMF Verite closed with a ZMF 2K copper cable. I used 13 songs. I tried to pick songs that I was incredibly familiar with, that I like, different genres that I listen to well. Additionally, I threw in a couple songs that I knew a lot of headphones had trouble with, and I wanted to see if cables would struggle with these songs as well. So I used the same 13 songs in the same order with everything else standard. The tubes I used, I almost forgot, for my friends in the Glen thread, I used the GEC U1820 rectifier. I used a pair of Kenrad 6J5s and a 6-pack of GE 6BX7s. So a lot of slam. Also, the 11 aspects of the music that I tested for were speed, which is very important to me because I'm a metalhead. Staging, mid-bass, slam, sub-bass extension and tightness, dynamics, mids, highs, the air in between what I was hearing, Pratt, there's that word again, how much I enjoyed a given song with the cable, which is highly subjective, and the smoothness of what I was hearing. And in case you're curious, the 13 songs that I used to test these cables was Enter Sandman by Metallica, a 24-bit lossless file. All the files are locally stored, all of them Red Book or above. One Fine Morning by Lighthouse, which is this really groovy 70s poppy, jazzy, proggy song. Into the Deep, which is some Sybient by Asia and Cosmosis. Friend of the Devil by Grateful Dead, that was a 24-bit file. Bridges of Fire by which is a Both's band, kind of in between Immortal and his new band. Or a Kanji, which was kind of just like a random Goa trance track that I pulled. Photosynthesis by Carbon-Based Lifeforms. The original version of Diamonds and Rust by Joan Baez. Pictures of Home by Deep Purple, 24-bit lossless. Bird of Paradise by Snowy White, which is a bluesy track. Come Together, the 2019 remastering of the Beatles' Abbey Road on 24-bit. Pigs, 3 different ones by Pink Floyd. Freaking love that song, 24-bit. And Pulse of the Dead by Parasite Inc., which is a very fast mellow death track. So those were the tracks that I tested. So we're going to start off with the RCA cable section. We're going to go from left to right, and this is kind of in the order, kind of in price-wise, but not necessarily what I preferred. So the first cable we have here is, I took notes, I can't remember all this, so I'm going to do a lot of reading, so you're going to have to forgive me here. This is a 2-foot, which is the shortest cable in the whole Shootout. And that means something. I actually spoke to 2 different cable makers, and both agreed that if you can get away with it for RCAs, the shorter, the better. This is a 2-foot cable made by World's Best Cable. It's a Canary L-4E65 Star Quad. I bought this off of Amazon about 2 years ago. They are no longer on Amazon. I don't know what happened, but you can't even get these on Amazon anymore. So these were $35. And I've been using these in my system for a long, long time. What I got to tell you about these actually surprised the shit out of me. These actually weren't that bad. These things slammed harder than any other cable in this Shootout. If you just like slam, this is a good solution for not a whole lot of money. What I wrote, great sub bass. Good Pratt. I hate that term, Pratt. Pace, rhythm, and timing. If I say Pratt, what I'm meaning is my ability to just get into the music, the way it moves me. Okay? It was musical, but it didn't sound natural. It actually sounded very, very digitized. So there's the trade-off with this particular cable. It sounded fake. It was decent with female vocals. It was very fun to listen to. And I would say the strongest aspect of this cable was the dynamics and the bass. The worst aspect was the smoothness. It wasn't very smooth. Like I said, it was kind of digitized sounding. And it didn't sound very natural at all. But for $35, I figured This is the only 2-digit cable in the Shootout, and I figured that these other cables would trounce this cable. And in a lot of areas it did, but this did a lot better than I thought it would. So I would say that the world's best cable is a good starter cable for somebody who maybe has an entry-level DAC amp, who's into rock. This thing rocks. It's a fun, hard-hitting, and it's not expensive. But again, I don't know where you can get it now because it just says currently unavailable on Amazon. So, but world's best cables. That's the first cable. Now, the second cable we're going to talk about was sent to me by Atl Ga from Ed5. This is his own personal cable. This is the Wire World Equinox 7, and it retails for approximately 140 bucks. This is what I wrote. It's fast. It has nice treble extension, nice mids, dynamics, not super smooth. So I think this is a more refined version of this. They're very similar. They're both fast. They both have good dynamics, but neither of them are your last word in smoothness and audiophile lingo like holographic imaging, etc., etc. Where I thought this excelled was, again, dynamics. I gave it a 9 out of a possible 10 across all the tracks. In speed, I gave it an 8.9 with an overall score of 8.16, whereas the world's best got an overall score of 7.96. So they're pretty close. One's 35, one's 140. The third cable we're going to talk about was sent to me from a fine gentleman down in Tennessee. Sorry, dude, I just don't speak French. Atelier 13 is the name of his store, and he has a website, and he was kind enough to send me a huge box of cables. This is the first one. This is the dark blue cable, the Atelier Audio UP1128. I wasn't really fond of this cable. This is what I wrote. A little edgy, decent treble extension, a bit harsh on the brass. So that Lighthouse track has a lot of horns in it, and it sounded a little bit harsh. It had very strong bass, but it wasn't super tight. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking that this cable really isn't burned in fully. I simply just don't have the time to burn in all these cables entirely. So this got essentially the same treatment that the rest of them did. Where I thought it excelled was in the staging. It had very nice wide staging. I also liked its Pratts, and I also liked the highs. So if you've got an ultra smooth, laid back system, you might dig this cable. The next cable we're going to discuss was also sent to me by Constantine from Tennessee at Atelier 13. This is the Atl Ga 40KLE. This retails for $174. What I wrote about this cable is it does well with slower music. It's also good with trance. It has good Pratts. And again, not too smooth in rolled off highs. Where I really liked it was with the staging again. It had very nice staging and very nice imaging. I thought with Joan Baez, it sounded fantastic. With some of the Sybian, it sounded really nice. But with faster stuff for metal, it was slow. You could hear it wasn't driving the metal in a fast, tight manner. It was kind of a blur. So if you're not a metalhead and you've got a bright setup, this might be the cable for you. Okay, so let's see. Now we're going to talk about a cable from Triode Labs. And this is actually a prototype. Let me take it out of the bag. This is a flat cable, and this was the longest cable in the Shootout. It's 2 meters long. And what I found out about this cable after the fact was it's not really meant for digital use. It's more intended to be used as an interconnect coming out of a turntable. But I didn't know that, so I tried it in the system and gave it a fair shake. What I found with this cable was that this thing was the smoothest cable. I mean, it was like butter. And the highs were just lopped off. And maybe that's because it's not really meant to be used the way I used it. It wasn't very fast. It had great staging. Nice sub bass. Guitars sounded very nice, very textured, earthy. Vocals, on the other hand, which is, I don't really understand it, were kind of so-so. Overall, I gave this an 8.15. Which brings us to, oh, I'm sorry, and this cable retails for $450. Which brings us to the final 2 cables. And if money is no object, you can just take these cables and forget about them, because we're down to 2. And before I start talking about these 2 cables, I did my best to not know what the prices were before I listened to them. I did not want to go into it with a bias. I didn't want to say, oh, well, this is the $500 cable, so this is automatically going to sound better than the $50 cable. This cable, I knew the price of. I couldn't avoid it. This one, I had no idea. And these 2 are the clear victors, by far. The rest of these are toys, in my opinion, compared to these 2. We'll start with the also sent by Triode Wire. This is also a prototype. And this one is made for digital use. Let me move my water. This hasn't even been released yet. He sent it to me to get my opinion of it, and it knocked my friggin' socks off. I was like, God damn. Labs Revelation, and 1 meter retails for $1,000, and I didn't know that price. I figured, okay, well, that's $450. This is going to be about the same. No, it's more than double, but it's good. This is what I wrote. Wow, very, very nice cable. Best thus far. Very natural sounding. I gave it an overall score of 9.32. I gave it a perfect 10 for the staging. All 13 songs, the soundstage was just phenomenal. Its weakest point was the highs. And I would have to change that because I've since done something different and listened to this again. And the highs are actually very good on this. I'm going to get back to the more details on this in a minute because this is a nice time to bring up this cable. which is probably my favorite cable overall of the whole Shootout. This is the C-Mark Less Loss, and its construction is top-notch. It's much heavier, much more pliable than the rest of the cables. If your setup is in a tight place, some of these cables simply aren't going to work for you because you can't bend them. This one you can bend any way you want, so that's a huge plus. This retails for $850. This is also not a cheap cable. This is what I wrote. Supreme depth, silly in fact. Very diffuse sound, totally different league, very refined, hauntingly lifelike with Joan Baez. When I was listening to Joan Baez with these cables, I felt like she was standing right in front of me. It was just so natural sounding, just hauntingly beautiful. After I wrote all this and did all of this other stuff, I introduced some power cables that Atelier 13 also sent me. And that kind of changed a little bit of how I'm thinking about these cables. I'm going to boil it down for you. These are both very expensive cables, and they're both top-notch sounding. You can't go wrong with either one, frankly. I would say if you listen to fast, heavy music, you go with this one. If you're not a metalhead and you're into jazz, classical, vocals, you go with this one. This is warmer and smoother. This one has more treble and is faster. But the holographic imaging on these two cables is just out of this friggin' world. Width, depth, height, and it swirls all around your head while you're listening to headphones. It's just fantastic. And so what I've learned, boys and girls, like headphones, like televisions, like cars, if you want excellent, you're going to pay a lot of money for it. And cables are no friggin' different. These are good to varying degrees for various things. These two cables right here are in a league by themselves. Fast and speedy, smooth and refined. You pick. $1,000, $850. And as I said before, I did not know the price of this one when I listened to it. It could have been a $10 cable. I didn't know, and it still knocked my socks off. All right, so moving right along, let's get into the USB part of it. For the USB section, I had 4. 3 of which were kindly sent to me by D. Minches from EdFi. David, thank you. These 3 are his own personal USB cables, and then there's a 4th that I'll get to at the end. The first one is the Audio Quest Cinnamon, and it's not super expensive, maybe 40 or 50 bucks. This is what I wrote about it. Hot garbage. End of discussion. This is awful. It's full of noise. It's grainy. I told David via email that I think that the USB cable that came with my 10-year-old printer would sound better than this. Don't waste your time. Terrible. Okay. So then we get to the real USB cables. The first one is a very odd looking. I'm almost afraid to. It's an old cable. He's had it for a while, and it has like this gauze thing on it. Anyway, this is the Maple Shade Clearview USB. It retailed for about $140 when it was made. Apparently, it's no longer available. What I wrote about it was it had good treble. Horns were a bit harsh. It's fast, and it was bass light. Now, before I go any further, I've always kind of been a believer in cables when it comes to like RCAs and power cables and certainly headphone cables. USB cables, I was like, how much difference can they make? They're transporting ones and zeros from point A to point B. How much difference can it make? A shit ton. It blew my mind how much difference in sound I was getting from the cinnamon to the maple shade to this one to that one. I mean, they all had their own sound signature, just like the RCAs, just like a headphone, just like tubes. They have their own sound signature. So again, good treble, horns a bit harsh. It was fast, but it was bass light. You can't get any more, but anyway, this is the Maple Shade Clearview USB. Then we go to this contraption right here. It's got this box in it. And I don't know what the box does, but this is the Total Dac D1. And this one retails for €350. And if you're over there watching this and you're choking, hearing that a USB cable is going to cost $350, yeah, I was shocked too. But this one is head and shoulders above this one and this one. I didn't write down any notes because as soon as I plugged this in, I just kind of stopped and I'm like, oh, okay, this is what a good USB cable sounds like. It was night and day. And I was using, for the USB cables, I was using the Leslos C-Mark cable, which was the very refined cable that I absolutely adore. So that's the USB or the RCAs I was using for all of these. This one was really good, but I was hearing some grain. Certainly not to the extent that the cinnamon gave me, but there was grain. And I don't like grain. And if I'm spending a lot of money, which for me, €350 on a USB cable is a shit ton of money, I expect no grain. None. Other than the grain, this sounded really good. Which then brings us to the clear and undisputed champion of the USB Shootout. And you've seen me talk about it on HeadFi. This is the Final Touch Audio Callisto, which was loaned to me by Fred Ainsley of Lampezator North America. Thank you, Fred. This USB cable, brace yourselves, gentlemen and ladies, retails for $850 for a cable. You know, when I first bought my Lampezator, Fred said, hey, I've got this USB cable. If you're interested, I'd let you check it out. And I was like, sure, yeah, it sounds great. How much is it? And he told me, and I almost choked. And I said, I'm not interested in hearing an $850 cable because I'm not going to buy an $850 cable. So this is what I've learned from the Shootout. Each and every piece of your gear makes a difference, okay? From the hardware to the interconnects to the electricity in your home, it all matters, period. It's unquestionable. One member on HeadFi asked me to categorize these like bang for buck, best cable at a reasonable price. And it's really hard for me to do that because I'm a metalhead and I like fast, aggressive sounding music. And the two RCAs that I started with, they were both fast and aggressive with good treble. But if you've already got a bright system, even if you are a metalhead, I wouldn't recommend those cables to you because they're bright. And if you had a bright cable to a bright system, you're to bright overload. So my recommendation, and this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say in this whole video, if you decide you're going to upgrade your cables, and I highly recommend that you do at some point if you can afford it, make sure whatever cable that you buy has an ironclad return policy. Because what sounds fantastic in my system isn't necessarily going to sound fantastic in your system. And if I tell you this Callisto kicks the crap out of every other USB cable I've ever heard, and it does, you may not like it in your system. It may be too much of this or not enough of that. And the same goes for all the other cables. Make sure you can return the cable if you don't like it. Okay? And going down to your hi-fi dealer isn't going to work because you're going to be hearing those cables in their setup, not yours. So now we're going to move on to the third and final part of Monster Zero's cable shootout. Before I discuss these two cables in front of me, allow me to say that no matter what cable I put into my system, whether it was the $35 one or the $1,000 one or the $100 USB or the $850 USB, it didn't matter the combination, it didn't matter the price tag. When I was listening to it through speakers, if there was any change whatsoever, it was incredibly subtle. Okay? Now, my speaker setup is not bad. I'm still using the same server. I'm still using the same Lampesator DAC. I'm using a $2,500 tube amp made by Rogue Audio, and I'm using $1,000 Focal bookshelf speakers. So we're not talking about a $35 setup here. Yet, through speakers, any changes I was hearing was incredibly subtle. Through headphones, that's an entirely different topic. Headphones, it was like night and day between each of these components. When I put these into my system, and I just did it today for reasons of my own, well, I can tell you, I didn't want to skew my perception of these with these. So I just used whatever power cables I had. I got some. I had 5 of them, all my gears using the same power cable, and I think they were about 40, maybe 50 bucks a piece. Nothing outrageous, but above, the standard black cable that comes with your PlayStation. And when I swapped to those $40 or $50 cables, I did notice better bass. It hit harder. I noticed it. When I pulled one cable and replaced it with this, I believe is also a less loss product sent to me once again by the fine gentleman down in Tennessee. I hooked this up to my DAC, and the difference blew my mind through speakers. I'm not saying headphones, I'm saying speakers. With the rest of the stuff, it was minimal change. With this, my mind was blown. All of a sudden, my little bookshelf near-field setup went 3D on my ass. And I was like, whoa, what is going on here? And Konstantin has told me that for a cable of this quality, you pretty much want to use it for your DAC. And so that's what I did. This power cable, brace yourselves, is $1,050. Okay, I'll just leave that there. I'm not going to pass judgment on it. I know that probably a lot of you are sitting there laughing at this point. I'm telling you, this made a ridiculous amount of difference in my near field setup when all this other stuff only made subtle little, maybe a little bit better treble or whatever. This was ridiculous. Now this contraption right here, it has been described to me by Konstantin as kind of an individual power conditioner. So instead of buying a big, gigantic power conditioner for several $1,000s, you buy an individual one for each component that you feel needs the boost. So this end goes into the components, and then you plug your regular power cable into here, and something in this wood block, I don't know what it is, does something to the power. I put this into my Glen, and the changes were dramatic. A few minutes ago, I said that the treble, I needed to change my opinion of the treble on that prototype cable because I did all of that testing without this stuff in it. When I put this in today and went back and listened to the two winners of the RCA, suddenly that particular cable had great treble extension. So that reinforces what I said before. Every single component in your chain will make a significant difference. I can't underscore that enough. This has been an incredible learning experience for me. I've been into music since I was a little child. Riders on the Storm was my favorite song as a 5-year-old boy. I didn't even know who the Doors were. I just loved the sound. And I grew up with audio, but for me, audio was, just a wall of sound, and you have a record player, and when the needle wears out, you put a penny on top of the stylus, and you keep listening until it falls apart. So for many years, it was good enough for me. It's like, okay, whatever. But in the past 10 years or so, I've gotten very serious about the quality of what I'm listening to. And this has kind of been the final frontier for me, because previously I've always wanted a better headphone or a better DAC or a better amp, trying to get that extra whatever I felt like I was missing. And now that I've got all that, and I'm in love with my Verite closed, I'm in love with my Lampizator, I'm in love with my Glen, I'm in love with my card, it was time for me to turn my attention to cables, and frankly, I was not prepared for what I learned. So, to wrap this up, I have no dog in this fight. If you notice on my channel, there are no commercials that pop up. Unlike all the other reviewers, you gotta click through the commercials. I have not monetized my channel. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing it because I want to help people who don't have the chance to get all this shit in their house at the same time and listen. And if you decide that you want to buy some of this, and you want to call Fred Ainsley from Lampizator for the Callisto, or you want to call Konstantin for this firewall or this cable or some of his RCA cables, you don't have to mention my name. You don't need to say, oh, Monster sent me, because I'm not getting a kickback here. This isn't for money. What I'm telling you is what I heard. So, to wrap it up, this has been Monster Zero with my long in production, going back and forth, cable shootout. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys next time.